Welcome to Mayhem CEDH, where questionable decks meet questionable pilots. For this week, we've got a pod that you can call coffee because it grinds so fine. God, that was horrible. I should cut that. Now, with that being said, let's check out the pod today. First, we have Kaylin on Rashmi Draw Go, which seeks to use Rashmi to turn all spells into cantrips, control the board, and end in a combo finish. Noah on Malcolm Bruse Pirates of America, a Jeskai mid-range combo deck that seeks to accrue value with its commanders in order to assemble a win con through Glinthorn Buccaneer or Underworld Breach. Aiden on Kraum Thrasios Toothless, a mid-range list that seeks to leverage powerful card advantage engines combined with robust interaction to pull ahead and win with one of many combos. And finally, Randy on Armix Thrasios Resolution, a mid-range reanimator deck that leverages removal and a value engine in the command zone to back up powerful reanimation targets. And now, with each pilot in their respective corner of the screen, let us begin. Randy draws and plays a Bayou for turn. It casts an Arbor Elf. Randy passes. Kaylin draws and plays a Tropical Island for turn. He casts a Soul Ring. Kaylin passes. Noah draws and plays a Flooded Strand for turn. He cracks it, paying a life and fetching up a Volcanic Island onto the field. He casts a Soul Ring of his own. He casts a Kraum, imprinting Seagate Restoration. He casts his commander, Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator. With a strong start, Noah passes. Aiden draws and casts a Lotus Petal. They crack it, adding a green. They use the green to cast a Findhorn Elves. They play a Sokenzan, Crucible of Defiance. Aiden passes. Randy draws and plays a Rejuvenating Springs for turn. It casts a Carpet of Flowers. Randy moves to the second main phase and adds a black through Carpet of Flowers. It activates Arbor Elf, untapping Bayou. Randy casts its commander, Armix, Filigree Thrasher. Randy passes the turn. Kaylin draws and plays a Hinterland Harbor for turn. He casts his commander, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. Kaylin passes to Noah. Noah draws and immediately moves to combat. He attacks Randy for 2 with Malcolm. It takes it, and Noah creates a treasure through Malcolm. In his second main phase, Noah casts a Felwar Stone. He taps his Kraum to cast Brainstorm. Noah draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Noah passes. Aiden draws and plays a Gaia's Cradle for turn. They cast Manglehorn. It enters and destroys Armix. The turn moves to Randy. Randy draws and adds a blue through Carpet of Flowers. It plays an Overgrown Tomb into play tap. It casts Mystic Remora. It casts its other commander, Thrasios Triton Hero. Randy passes. Kaylin draws and plays a Windswept Heath for turn. Kaylin passes. Noah draws and casts his other commander, Bruse Boorish Herder. It enters and gives Malcolm double strike and lifelink. Noah moves to combat and attacks Aiden for 4. Aiden takes it and Noah creates 2 treasure tokens through Malcolm, which enter tapped due to Manglehorn. Noah passes. Aiden draws and casts a Finale of Devastation, where X equals 2, not paying for Randy's Remora. It resolves and Aiden fetches up a Dockside Extortionist into play. Dockside enters and Aiden creates 8 treasures. Aiden casts their commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. They follow it up with a Seedborn Muse. In response, Kaylin casts Counterspell, targeting Seedborn Muse, not paying for Randy's Remora. Rashmi triggers, and in response, Aiden casts Fierce Guardianship, not paying for Randy's Remora. Fierce Guardianship counters Counterspell, Rashmi reveals an Otawara Soaring City into Kaylin's hand, and Seedborn Muse resolves. Aiden passes the turn. Aiden untaps with Randy, who pays for Mystic Remora. Randy draws and adds a black through its carpet. It plays a Drowned Catacombs for turn. It casts Entomb. It resolves and Randy fetches up a Consecrated Sphinx into its graveyard. It casts Necromancy, targeting Consecrated Sphinx. In response, Aiden activates Thrasios, scrying and putting a Breeding Pool onto the battlefield tapped. Necromancy resolves, and Consecrated Sphinx enters the battlefield with Necromancy attached. At the end of Randy's turn, Kaylin cracks his Windswept Heath, paying a life and fetching up a forest onto the battlefield. He casts Nature's Claim, targeting Necromancy, not paying for Randy's Remora. Rashmi triggers, and in response, Randy casts Fierce Guardianship, targeting Nature's Claim. In response, Kaylin pays a life and casts Force of Will, pitching Unsubstantiate, targeting Fierce Guardianship, not paying for Randy's Remora. Force counters Fierce, Rashmi reveals a Resculpt into Kaylin's hand, and Nature's Claim resolves, destroying Necromancy, killing Consecrated Sphinx. The turn moves to Kaylin. Aiden untaps with Kaylin. Kaylin draws and plays a Flooded Strand. At the end of Kaylin's turn, Aiden activates Thrasios, scrying and revealing a Talisman of Curiosity into their hand. They activate Thrasios again, scrying and putting a Training Center into play tapped. Still at the end step, Noah casts a Braid, targeting Manglehorn, not paying for Randy's Remora. Manglehorn is destroyed and the turn moves to Noah. Aiden untaps with Noah. Noah draws and plays an Iganjo, Seed of the Empire for turn. He casts an Imperial Recruiter. It resolves and Noah fetches up a Glinthorn Buccaneer into his hand. He casts Glinthorn Buccaneer. In response, Aiden activates Thrasios, scrying and putting a tropical island into play tapped. Glinthorn resolves, and Noah moves to combat. He swings Malcolm at Aiden and Glinthorn and Bruse Tarl at Kaelin. Bruse Tarl triggers, giving Malcolm double strike and lifelink. In response, Kaelin channels Otawara, Soaring City, targeting Glinthorn Buccaneer. In response, Noah pays 2 to activate Glinthorn, discarding a card. In response, Kaelin casts Resculpt, targeting Glinthorn, not paying for Randy's Remora. Rashmi triggers and Kaelin reveals a Beast Within into his hand. Glinthorn gets exiled and Noah creates a 4/4 elemental token. Kaelin and Aiden take the damage and Noah creates 2 treasures through Malcolm. In his second main phase, Noah casts a Grand Abolisher. In response, Aiden activates Thrasios, scrying and revealing a Hullbreaker Horror into their hand. The table is put on high alert and Noah passes. Aiden draws and casts a Talisman of Curiosity, paying for Randy's Remora. They activate Thrasios, scrying and putting a Rejuvenating Springs into play tapped. Aiden passes. Aiden untaps with Randy, who pays for Mystic Remora, activating Arbor Elf to do so. It draws and adds 2 black through Carpet. It casts Grist, the Hunger Tide. In response, Aiden flashes in Hullbreaker Horror. It resolves, and with Grist still on the stack, Aiden casts Mystical Tutor, not paying for Randy's Remora. Hullbreaker triggers and Aiden targets Grist. In response, Randy casts Culling the Weak, sacrificing Arbor Elf as an additional cost, adding 4 black. Still in response, it flashes in an Opposition Agent. In response, Kaelin cracks his Flooded Strand, paying a life and fetching up a Breeding Pool onto the battlefield tapped. Opposition Agent resolves, Hullbreaker Horror bounces Grist, and Mystical Tutor resolves. Randy fetches up a Force of Will from Aiden's deck into exile. Randy plays a Command Tower for turn and recasts Grist to the Hunger Tide. It resolves, and Randy upticks Grist, milling a card and creating a 1/1 insect token. The turn moves to Kaelin. Aiden untaps with Kaelin, who draws and casts a Kraum Mox, not paying for Randy's Remora. Rashmi triggers and Kaelin reveals a Merchant Scroll into his hand. Kaelin declines the imprint trigger. He plays a Wooded Foothills and passes the turn. At the end of Kaelin's turn, Aiden activates Thrasios, scrying and revealing an Isochron Scepter into their hand. They activate Thrasios again, scrying and revealing an Imperial Recruiter into their hand. The turn moves to Noah. Aiden untaps with Noah, who draws and immediately moves to combat. He attacks Grist with his elemental token, Kaelin with Bruse Tarl, and Aiden with Malcolm. Bruse triggers and gives Malcolm double strike and lifelink. Randy blocks the elemental with its insect token, and Kaelin and Aiden take the damage, with Noah creating 2 treasures through Malcolm. In his second main phase, Noah overloads Cyclonic Rift, bouncing his opponent's non-land permanents. At the end of Noah's turn, Kaelin cracks his Wooded Foothills, paying a life and fetching up a forest onto the battlefield. The turn moves to Aiden. Aiden draws and plays a Scalding Tarn. They crack it, paying a life and fetching up a Taiga onto the battlefield. They cast Dockside Extortionist. In response, Noah casts Silence. In response, Aiden casts Swan Song, targeting Silence. Silence is countered, and Noah creates a 2/2 bird token. Dockside enters, and Aiden creates 3 treasures. They recast their commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. They cast Findhorn Elves. They cast Seedborn Muse. In response, Randy casts Force of Will from exile, paying a life and pitching Thrasios back to the command zone, targeting Seedborn Muse. Seedborn Muse is countered, and Aiden passes the turn. Randy draws and plays a Watery Grave into play untapped, paying 2 life. It casts Carpet of Flowers. It casts a Birds of Paradise. It casts Neoform, sacrificing Birds of Paradise as an additional cost. In response, Kaelin casts Mana Drain, countering Neoform. In Randy's second main phase, it adds a blue through Carpet. It cast Praetor's Grasp, targeting Noah. Grasp resolves, and Randy fetches up a card out of Noah's deck face down into exile. It recasts Mystic Remora. Randy passes. Kaelin draws and casts a Soul Ring, not paying for Randy's Remora. He recasts his commander, Rashmi, Eternity's Crafter. The turn moves to Noah. Noah draws and plays a City of Brass for turn. Noah moves to combat and swings Bruse Tarl at Kaelin and Malcolm at Aiden. Bruse Tarl triggers, giving Malcolm double strike and lifelink. They both take it, and Noah creates 2 treasures through Malcolm. In his second main phase, Noah casts Savine's Reclamation, targeting Flooded Strand, paying for Randy's Remora. It resolves, and Flooded Strand enters the battlefield. Noah passes the turn. Aiden draws and plays a Polluted Delta. They crack it, and in response, Noah cracks his Flooded Strand, fetching up a Rogrin Triome onto the battlefield tapped. Aiden fetches up a Volcanic Island onto the battlefield. They cast Imperial Recruiter. It resolves, and Aiden fetches up a Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy into their hand. They cast Kinnan. In response, Kaelin casts Delay, not paying for Randy's Remora. Rashmi triggers and reveals a Teferi, Master of Time, into his hand. Delay counters and exiles Kinnan with 3 time counters. Aiden channels Colossal Sky Turtle, bouncing Dockside Extortionist back to their hand. Aiden recasts Dockside. In response, Noah cracks his treasures. Dockside resolves and Aiden creates 6 treasures. They recast Hullbreaker Horror. Aiden casts a Talisman of Curiosity, not paying for Randy's Remora. Hullbreaker triggers and Aiden bounces Dockside. Aiden recasts Dockside, bouncing Talisman and creating 6 more treasures. Aiden recasts Talisman, not paying for Randy's Remora, and bounces Finned Horn Elves to their hand. Aiden presents a loop of infinitely casting and bouncing Dockside with Hullbreaker Horror and Finned Horn Elves. With infinite treasures, Aiden activates Thrasios enough times to draw the deck and play out all lands tapped. They cast Arcane Signet, paying for Randy's Remora, bouncing the Remora. They cast Temur Sabertooth. They present another loop of using Temur Sabertooth to bounce all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. With Underworld Breach and Brain Freeze in Aiden's hand, the rest of the table see the writing on the wall and concede the game. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe to catch future videos, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.